tyranny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA, and also from the, what's the name of this? Blythe Conference Room at the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas. Coverage of the 2024 Mass Torts Conference here. We will be covering a couple of legal cases. Meanwhile, excuses and half-hearted apologies for the Israeli-targeted killing of 7 aid workers. As all aid shipments to Gaza suspended, and the Biden administration responds with an ask for $18 billion in F-15 jets. Meanwhile, Wall Street Journal poll, Biden trails Trump in 6 of 7 swing states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina. The slight lead, however, in Wisconsin. This, as uncommitted, shows some strength in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Wisconsin. And maybe New York. They got to tally it up. Trump and Biden sweep yesterday's primaries. NATO proposes $100 billion in Ukrainian military aid. Wisconsin Governor Evers vetoes a trans high school sports ban, throwing absolutely nothing into jeopardy or confusion. Taiwan suffers the worst earthquake in 20 years. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is that time of year again where I head to Las Vegas, Nevada, and poor Emma has to sit in the studio. Meanwhile, I have this luxurious conference room and all to myself. Yes, look at that. The whole outlet to yourself. There is literally, it's this room. You could probably hear how empty it is.
Yeah, we're gonna miss the guys playing golf indoors at the stand where you hear the whack every 45 seconds. You know, a bit nostalgic for that.
And where's the ambiance here?
Yeah, well, I mean, generally, longtime viewers of the show will know that generally I make this trip 1 to 2 times a year. There are 2 conferences, and I am in sort of the exhibition hall. I'm only here for 1 day this time because of scheduling complications, and so I didn't get into the hall. And but they did provide for me my own room. It's lonely.
It's almost better, right? You can do a lot of activities in there. Stretch out your legs.
Got some good reverb.
It's quieter. This is actually where I'm sleeping as well. This is, and I don't know if you can see over there. There's a big screen. There's no remote though, so I think it's more like a AV projection. But it's nice. I could actually pull back one of these sliding things here and make it join with the people next door. But I don't know what they're doing over there. So. But I will be joined. We've done a couple of pre-tapes. It's always tricky to get guests, particularly on the first day when I'm here, and this is the only day I'm here. People are still coming to the conference. At one point we were talking, there was a slight chance I was going to be able to sit down with Keith Ellison, but it turns out he's not going to be here. There's a couple other lawyers that I was hoping to speak to. I won't have a chance to talk to them, but I should. As it is now, I had a good conversation with Mike Papantonio, of course, former. Worked with him at Air America Radio and on Ring of Fire Radio, both, well, mostly after Air America went under. And he is one of the top trial lawyers in the country. People may have seen that movie, Dark Waters. Is that what it was?
With Mark Ruffalo.
With Mark Ruffalo. And that told the story of a lawyer who started this case on PFAS, these forever chemicals that were being dumped into essentially the Ohio River or a tributary into it by DuPont. And we've talked about this case. We were following this case for years and years here at this conference. I've interviewed Rob Billette, the guy that Mark Ruffalo played. But once that first aspect of the case happened, later it was ultimately litigated, and that litigator was Mike Papantonio. And he went in and essentially broke DuPont. I mean, literally broke them. They, in the way it works, and I don't want to go too deep into it, is that the plaintiff, the defendant, you have a class of people, and it's not really a class action suit, it's a mass tort. Class action suit, everybody suffers the same damages. In a mass tort, the perpetrator has done something that has caused different damages amongst people. So you pour this stuff into the water, maybe one person gets cancer and another person has gastrointestinal problems, or someone else gets a different type of cancer, on and on. And so there are different harms, and so the damages are different. And the way that they work these things out, I mean, Papantonio sat on the BP council. So when BP had the big spill, it's going to impact shrimp, fishermen different than it is like hoteliers or people who, swim or whatever it is. And so they come up with a formula, an algorithm, essentially. And in that PFAS case, the defendant gets to pick a case and says, there's 3,500 cases that could be out there that we have established. We get to pick the first case and we try that case. And that ends up being like the floor in terms of a negotiation. And even in their best case, the damages were found to be about $1.5 million. And then they do the plaintiff's case, and that was like something like $3.5 million. So somewhere in the middle is where they negotiate, but you multiply that times 3,500, and that's a lot of money. And it could have been even more. And so DuPont is sort of like a shell of what it was. I don't even know if they exist as much anymore. They tried to sort of spin off everything. But we will be talking to Mike Papantonio. And first, we're going to be talking to a guy named Larry James, who has Tommy James, who has been pursuing these cases that we've touched on in the past here, I think, of these sort of private institutions that ostensibly take care of troubled kids. And it is far larger issue than you would imagine. There's a very popular, I guess, documentary on Netflix.
On Netflix. I watched that. Yeah.
Okay. What was it called? I can't remember
I can't. Once you binge something, it's difficult to remember it. But it was phenomenal.
He raises it, and that one was about a private facility, or I should say, was sponsored by it was wealthier kids. This cuts across all economic classes. And he'll explain that. But before we get to those interviews, and hopefully one or two others, if people can find me in the basement of the Wynn Hotel, let's first play this stuff. It was strange for me because I was here 6 months ago covering this, I think exactly 6 months ago, covering this conference.
On October 7th.
on October 7th. And so almost exactly 6 months ago. And, you're in Las Vegas. I don't have access to news. I'm out of my normal rhythm and stuff like that. The World Central Kitchen killings, just horrific. I have a friend who's in Cyprus who's been loading those boats. He says it's a complete disaster. He knew one of the people. It is indicative of what Israel has been doing to UNRWA workers, and it is completely consistent with everything else they have been doing in Gaza. I know you went through yesterday the bombing and attacking of the 3 separate cars, one after the other, as the passengers of these cars kept trying to escape and moving to the other car. And I'm sure you went over the fact that the roofs of these cars are specifically designed in such a way so that if there are drones or planes or helicopters from the air, they can be seen to be World Central Kitchen vehicles.
Yeah, we showed how they had the logo right on top, reminiscent of in 2006 when Israel bombed a Red Cross vehicle who had the Red Cross on the top. That infamous image has been recirculated.
It's on the top for that reason.
Exactly.
I mean, this is and they're coordinating obviously with the Israelis. The Israelis know where they are. There are 2 things that I just want to say that you probably covered yesterday, but I just got to say, one is, even if we stipulate that there was an armed person who was around the facility, apparently they thought the Israelis, their story is that they claim that that armed person could have been in the cars. Put aside the fact that it would be absurd for an aid organization not to have security.
Right.
But even if I was to stipulate that that person somehow the Israelis knew was a Hamas fighter who had gone in there, it is also absurd to contemplate the idea that an aid organization would do anything other than just stay out of their way and not get involved in this. But even if we stipulate that that armed person was Hamas and was in the car, the idea that it's okay to kill 3 carfuls of aid workers to get one Hamas fighter is against any interpretation of international law. Never mind that they're aid workers, that we know that they're civilians. It's against any interpretation of international law. It is a completely disproportionate response. There is no indication that they thought that they had any sense of who this person was. They just assumed it was an armed person who was from Hamas. So it's not as if this was like the grand commander killing this one person was going to end all hostilities. This was just, even according to the Israelis, just a guy. It's just completely consistent with what Israel has been doing. And they achieved the desired effect. They've done this with journalists. They've done this with other aid workers. It's an absolute horror show. And they achieved the desired effect, which was to get both the World Central Kitchen and ANARA to essentially stop providing aid because they cannot protect their people.
Right. It's consistent with the fact that anybody that's giving aid in the form of food is under attack. We also have heard that doctors are changing out of their scrubs once they leave the hospital because it's apparently a target on their back if they are shown to be medical workers. They are trying to kill anybody saving Palestinians.
We got a couple of clips that aren't directly related to Israel's latest atrocity, but are important to show in its wake. and discuss, what needs to happen now. Now, of course, the Israelis have been sort of leaking plans to attack Rafah in some instances, saying it's a 6-month assault. Here is a clip of Mustafa Barghouti. Sorry.
It's okay.
I've been criticized for, rightly so, for my pronunciation. Mustafa Barghouti. He is the brother, I believe, of Marwan Barghouti, who has been in Israeli prison for almost 20 years now, I think.
Often referred to as the Mandela of Palestinians, right? In the sense of like he's quite a popular leader who has been imprisoned really for that, for in many ways for that reason by the Israelis. And
here he is talking to an Al Jazeera news presenter about whether the Israel will change direction now after having essentially assassinated these aid workers.
What do you make of the world reaction to it so far? Do you feel that this is a turning point?
No, and I'm so shocked that countries like Australia, with all due respect, Australia, Britain, Poland, did not even condemn the attack. For God's sake, these are their citizens. They didn't dare to condemn the attack of Israel. And the United States representatives, Mr. Blinken, he had the guts to say when he was discussing this matter that we must make sure that Israel has the ability to defend itself. Israel is not defending itself. Israel is attacking Palestinians and attacking internationals. And the spokesperson of the National Security Council also had the American had the guts to say that we don't have proofs that it was intentional. So they're already taking sides and they are already trying to cover up for Israel. And what we see here is a horrible double standard. Compare that with their behavior when Israel claimed, without proving, that some UNRWA workers cooperated with Hamas, and immediately all these countries shut off funding of UNRWA. Come on, this is the most clear proof of a very bad double standard that is followed by many Western governments. And by doing so, they are encouraging Israel to commit these crimes and encouraging Israel to be above the law and above international law.
This is on the same day or around the same 24-hour period that we also saw Israel targeting a diplomatic mission in Syria, Iran's diplomatic mission, also taking moves to ban Al Jazeera within Israel, stifling free speech, a cornerstone of democracy. It seems that it is ramping up these efforts to push the international community, and yet we're still not hearing anything to stop it. What is the dangers of it acting with such impunity?
The very big danger and immediate danger is that they will conduct this terrible massacre in Rafah. And they can do it, and they will do it, unless something happens immediately to impose sanctions on Israel. And that would mean the largest massacre in modern history. The other thing is that they will continue to try to push Palestinians out of Gaza into Sinai. And this would be the worst act of ethnic cleansing. There has to be immediate action. And the only thing that will stop Israel is sanctions. Sanctions have to be imposed on Israel, including preventing supplies of military equipment and military, like Canada did, and also taking other sanctions on Israel. Look, Israel is now not only killing people, but also it is violating the United Nations Security Council resolution. It is violating the rulings of the International Court of Justice. They don't care. I think somebody should check the sanity of people like Netanyahu and his crowd. I mean, they're going totally out of control. And I trust the people. I so appreciate the people who are demonstrating every day, pressuring their governments. And that's what we need, more pressure on governments to immediately take actions to sanction Israel, to force it to stop this atrocity and this genocide.
Yes, the fact that he mentioned sanctions there are really important to me, because we are well past ceasefire now. Or
even just lack of aid.
Yes, and I think, of course, well-meaning people are talking about ceasefire. But again, I do think that the procedural wartime language of ceasefire actually does a lot of work to lie about this situation, which is that this is not a Rafah offensive. It's exactly what Barghouti said there. It will be a mass slaughter, one of the worst in modern history, unprecedented in that instance. This is not an Israel-Hamas war. It is a genocide, one-sided by Israel imposing violence upon a population where they have complete control over it, where they're killing hospital workers because they're saving Palestinians, killing aid workers because they're feeding Palestinians. So, we are well past a ceasefire, right? Because the ceasefire, as he says there, the resolution did pass the United Nations Security Council with the U.S. abstaining. The U.S. then went on in front of the podium, in front of the White House press corps, and said, well, we don't see this as binding, even though it's quite clear the Security Council resolutions are binding. But we're past that point. We now need to begin thinking about isolating Israel. I think we should have done that a long time ago. But through sanctions, through imposing them on this out of control, rogue state, that we see Netanyahu was grinning as he announced that, and didn't even decide to say, it was a Hamas rocket. He just was like, yeah, but basically crap happens, was what he said as he grinned into the camera. So that is where we need to reorient this conversation at this point.
And in addition to just sort of the insanity of $18 billion worth of F-15s being transferred to Israel, it feels, when you all those 2,000 pound bombs that were transferred last week, maybe it was at the beginning of this week, was it on Monday? Right. That there is a sense that the U.S. is basically saying to Israel, if you want to widen this conflict, that's one of the things that I think I get even more worried about as well, is that there is either they are getting these weapons because they do intend to go into Rafah. They know what it's going to look like to the rest of the world. In particularly, it is going to make it almost impossible for groups like Hezbollah or other Iranian proxies, or frankly, in the streets in Jordan, to just sit there and watch this wholesale slaughter and not react. And one wonders if these other bombs and these other airplanes, right, because they're not using jets in Gaza, aren't there to either involve in some offensive war, you get the sense of like the neocons who would say, like, well, we're there, let's just do the whole job, let's just do the whole region, or that they are preparing for an offensive on Gaza, on Rafah, that is going to be so bloody and murderous that they expect a certain amount of blowback. Either way, it's a terrifying idea, and the U.S. is going to provide that weaponry, which as some type of insurance blanket for them is grotesque.
I saw, to your point, Sam, Trita Parsi made this point that, the Iran, it seemed like Iran and the United States were having conversations behind the scenes in the lead up to this incredibly provocative attack on the embassy in Syria, the Iranian embassy that Israel did, because there were the Iraqi militias were kind of acting in that proxy manner and were going after the United States, but there had been no attacks over the last 6 weeks. So that indicates that the U.S. was engaging in diplomatic talks with Iran behind the scenes, and Israel didn't notify the U.S. that it was bombing this Iranian embassy. So this is Netanyahu saying, we don't really care about your diplomacy. We're going to make tension. We're going to escalate tensions with Iran regardless to draw you in, even as you're attempting to avoid that very reality. How is Biden allowing this total psychopath? Barghouti is right there. Check this guy's mental sanity. We are in a situation where He is completely out of control. This is historic, the level of impunity that he is and arrogance that he is operating with.
Yep.
And just from an optics perspective, Biden looks incredibly weak.
Well, I mean, Biden has not done anything. I mean, even if you consider rhetoric to be something, has done nothing in any way that would indicate to Netanyahu that there's anything that he can do that would be problematic from Biden's perspective. There may be this notion behind the scenes where they're going like, well, if you're going to do this, you're going to need to, it's going to be hard and we're going to have to massage this or massage that. Meanwhile, in 4 states yesterday, there were primaries, and uncommitted was available in Connecticut and Rhode Island as an option. I think it was uninstructed in Wisconsin. Yep. In New York, what activists were doing was, and anybody, I mean, frankly, anybody who was interested in sending a message, just picking up your ballot and leaving it blank and then having it scanned. Now, that is a cumbersome thing, and it's not like the voting workers were there, sort of saying that's this is how you do this and that. So I haven't seen the numbers there, and it's going to be hard to sort of like suss out. But the point is that there has been enough activism that at least the White House seems to be upset about it, but not necessarily enough for there to be changes. It felt like a week ago that maybe we were seeing sort of a rebellion in the Senate, and perhaps one that was growing. It seems to, I haven't heard as much about that in the past couple of days. People are piling on Brian Schatz when he put out a tweet saying, it's a real shame of what happened and nobody who's giving out food should be attacked, as opposed to like, all in the passive sense, like, hey, there was someone who's doing the attacking. It's true, aid workers should not be attacked. But then there's another cohort of people who you should say to, hey, you, Israel, should not be attacking aid workers. In fact, you shouldn't be attacking anyone at this point. You've done enough killing and damage. But last night, the Biden White House was having a dinner, I guess, to celebrate the end of, or I don't know if it was the end of Ramadan. I don't think that ends for another couple of days.
It was Arab American
Iftar as well. Celebrating Iftar is one of the commemorative.
And also Arab American History Day or month, I believe. They had put out they put out a statement on this on April 1st, and I had to double check that it was not an April Fool's joke.
And at the dinner turned out to be more of like a I don't know what you would call it, a meeting. But
I think because, the activists didn't want to be eating when people are experiencing famine in Gaza. They didn't like that symbolism. Go on.
Exactly. And Dr. Thayer Ahmed, who we had on this program about a month and a half ago, on February 14th, I think it was. He's from Chicago, but if you'll remember, he had spent 3 weeks, a couple of weeks earlier, in Khan Yunis, working at the hospital there. And just before it was actually assaulted by the Israelis, or I think the Israeli assault happened maybe on the 15th or 16th of February. And we had just spoken to him. He wasn't, what he witnessed there was horrific, obviously. He was he was invited to the dinner. And well, let's let him tell his story on CNN from last night with Caitlin Collins.
Officials had planned an iftar dinner at the White House tonight, an event to break the daily fast with Muslim Americans during Ramadan. But sources tell CNN that so many of them declined the invitation, uncomfortable with the idea of having a celebratory meal as people in Gaza are starving. That means the White House scales it back to just be a policy meeting. But even that did not go as planned for the White House. One Palestinian American who is an emergency medicine physician and volunteered in Gaza earlier this year walked out of that meeting. That doctor, Dr. Thayer Ahmad, joins me now. And Dr. Ahmad, it's great to have you here. Can you just start by telling me what happened when you went to the White House tonight? What was said inside that room?
Well, yeah, I thank you for having me. I think, we had shown up to this meeting really concerned about what was taking place in the Gaza Strip. And I'm glad that you mentioned that we were insisting that there not be any food there. It made no sense for us to sort of break bread while talking about a famine taking place. We had shown up, and the president and the vice president, the national security advisor are in the room. And it was very brief comments by the president saying he wants to hear from us and he wants to listen to us. And so I spoke first, and I let him know that I am from a community that's reeling. We are grieving, and our heart is broken for what's been taking place over the last 6 months. And that the rhetoric that has been coming out of the Biden administration, that's been coming out of the White House, it's frustrated a lot of people, especially people who are Palestinian Americans, Muslim Americans, Arab Americans. We are not satisfied with what has taken place. There has been no concrete steps. But keep in mind, we're very concerned about the people that are over in the Gaza Strip, that are in Palestine right now, who are not just starving, but are facing the threat of a looming Rafah invasion. And so I was able to share that with the president and let him know that out of respect for my community, out of respect for all of the people who have suffered and who have been killed in the process, I need to walk out of the meeting. And I want to walk out with decision makers and let them know what it feels like for somebody to say something and then walk away from them and not hear them out and not hear their response.
Wow. I mean, how did President Biden respond to that?
There wasn't a lot of response. He actually said that he understood, and I walked away. And I think, for me, just like many of the other Palestinian Americans and Palestinians, or as I mentioned, many of the people who are interested in what's going on, we're panicking. I mean, we're talking about 1.7 million people are in Rafah right now. And we heard that there was a UN security resolution that had passed and the U.S. abstained. And we were thrilled about this. But only moments later to have that sort of joy ripped from us when our own White House is saying, oh, it's a non-binding resolution. They're undermining the very UN Security Council resolution that's calling for a ceasefire. Okay, well, then let's think about what happens next. Oh, then we hear that there's an arms transfer that's going to take place. And we know that included in these arms transfers are these 2,000-pound bombs that are leveling neighborhoods. I mean, I was in Gaza in January. I saw the devastation of Khan Yunis. I saw Deir al-Balah. I mean, these bombs are wreaking havoc, and people are fleeing to the south, to Rafah, the southern edge of Gaza, bordering up against Egypt. And we're transferring more bombs, more bullets, more fighter jets. What's going to happen to those people in Rafah? I mean, I'm telling you that every single humanitarian aid organization, every single person invested in what's taking place and watching, we are trying to scream at the top of our lungs, please, we cannot allow a ground invasion to take place. We need food to be able to enter and it to be distributed safely. And I'm glad you mentioned the tragic loss of the World Central Kitchen workers who were a part of an approved route. I mean, these are people who are coordinating and just trying to deliver food to hungry people, and they're assassinated in the process. And so there is so much wrong in Gaza.
And it sounds like you don't think that the White House is hearing you. Were you the only Palestinian in that room tonight?
Yeah, I was the only Palestinian American in that room. I think that there were plenty of people who probably declined, but I know that there are many people who I had mentioned who should be present there, who for whatever reason weren't given the invite. And it's important to mention, I'm a humanitarian physician. I go to the Gaza Strip. I am a Palestinian American, but I'm not an organizer. I'm not a leader of any local community here. I'm not a part of any organization that I'm the president of. And so even me being selected to be invited to this place, it's not really representative of the diverse community that makes up the Palestinian diaspora. It's not representative of them.
And he didn't even mention how he apparently handed Biden, when walking out, a letter from an 8-year-old girl pleading for him, not an 8-year-old Palestinian girl in Gaza, not to invade Rafah, which is an incredible act of protest. I mean, he was so wonderful when you interviewed him, Sam, here, and spoke with such clarity, let alone his bravery of doing this work in the Gaza Strip. But this was a really important action that he took here as well.
Yeah, folks, we'll put a link to his February 14th interview on this program. I think he had been on Democracy Now! The day before, too. It's worth watching both those, frankly, to get a sense of what he saw on the ground. And again, that was a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
Well, he was there in January, and the devastation is, Al Shifa Hospital, as you've probably seen the images, has been completely obliterated, and in the most sort of grotesque and brutal way. So go and check those interviews out. I would imagine we're going to see increasingly greater protests in this country that hopefully would put some pressure on maybe individual lawmakers who could then, sort of begin to pressure, apply pressure on the administration. I think I saw some polling in Wisconsin that something like literally like 99%, maybe it was 100% of people under the age of 30 wanted the Biden administration to restrain Israel. That's where we're at right now. Let's take a little bit of a turn and focus on what I am out here in Las Vegas for, interviewing lawyers. And the first lawyer that we have up is Tommy James. He is an attorney from Alabama, and I almost got him to go off on Tommy Tuberville, and he did not. But he I think you can get a little sense of but this is an interesting story about how trial lawyers, plaintiffs' attorneys, whatever you want to call them, function in many respects as private attorney generals. Here is that interview that I did yesterday. Continuing our coverage from the 2024 Mass Torts Conference in Las Vegas from the Wynn Hotel. I am in a conference room and out of the exhibitor hall. But joining me now is Tommy James from Tommy James Law in Alabama.
Yes, sir.
Whereabouts in Alabama?
We're in Birmingham.
In Birmingham. And just give me a sense of how long have you been a trial lawyer, and what kind of cases have you generally covered?
Yeah, I've been practicing for about 27 years and started off doing the usual kind of things, car wrecks and truck wrecks and some products liabilities cases, and then kind of started suing the state in personal injury cases, suing state employees. And I had a couple of really, really bad cases where individuals were at state facilities for people with mental disabilities and physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, and had some success there, wrongful death cases, some horrible sexual assault cases. And then probably about 20 years ago, it kind of morphed into representing young people who are institutionalized, right or wrong, not prison type cases, but when they're placed into residential facilities, psychiatric facilities, hospitals, sometimes not penitentiary, but some places for troubled kids who have been adjudicated in juvenile court. And just saw the horrible things that was going on in these places. And so kind of just took that as my calling to help these people who can't help themselves. And
where are the parents in that equation?
Well, it's kind of in these kind of cases, it's two parts. Some of the parents place their children in these types of facilities like therapeutic boarding schools, wilderness camps, things like that. If they're having behavioral issues, they'll pay countless amount of money to send their children to these programs so the kids will, quote, get better. I mean, these programs promise the parents, and they manipulate the parents, saying, based on what you're telling us here about this child, he's on the wrong path. I mean, he's going to die if you don't do something fast. So they'll pay this ungodly amounts of money to place a kid in one of these types of facilities. And oftentimes, and this is the thing people are shocked by, is when the parents pay to place children in these places, the children don't want to go. I mean, they rarely go voluntarily. Right. So they pay what's called a transport company, but it's called gooning, to basically come in the middle of the night and legally kidnap their children to take them to these facilities. And they always tell them when they wake the children up in the middle of the night, come into their room and say, well, you can either go the hard way or the easy way. And they have the zip ties ready to go. And
oh, geez.
Yeah. So most of the times they quote, go the easy way. But that right there, when that's a trauma in and of itself, that a child, they're in their safest spot in their bedroom in the middle of the night, they'll never get over that. So you have the private pay that places these, and you have the government pay facilities, and those happen more often. Child is placed because the Child and Family Services Division of whatever state it is. In Alabama, it's called DHR. A lot of these kids are foster children, and because of bad upbringings, or I shouldn't say that, but because of drugs or alcohol or something like that, traumas they've had over time, they'll be placed in a facility like this by the state if they don't have a disability.
So these aren't necessarily kids of wealthy families. It sounds like it runs across the spectrum.
Exactly. Do you have the places like, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, about the program on Netflix. That's one of these private pay places where the parents are very wealthy. There's an interesting topic, they put a graphic up in that documentary saying how much it costs to go to this Ivy Ridge school in New York. It was more than Harvard and Ivy League schools for a yearly tuition to these places. But again, like you said, state Medicaid will pay for these other children who maybe aren't wealthy in any ways and have had problems growing up and things like that. Then the state will place them in these facilities, and just horrible things are going on in both types of facilities.
Okay.
So basically, the easier way to say it, they're the same type of facilities, but some kind of cater to government money and some cater to private pay.
And we should be clear, all of these facilities are privately run. These
Correct.
are not these.
Correct.
These are, and so you've got basically entrepreneurs, and I'm using the word, sort of loosely here, who are going out and sometimes they're saying this is the solution. And sometimes it sounds like they're also creating a problem so that they are a solution.
Right. And you say entrepreneur, and that is the best way to describe the operators of these facilities. And Jay Ripley, he founded, a lot of people know across the country, facilities called Sequel Youth and Family Services. Now, they've been put out of business now, and they're calling themselves something else, but just horrible abuses occurred in these facilities. And Jay Ripley, founded Sequel. And prior to that, he was CEO of Jiffy Lube and things like this. And he was involved in restaurants. And I've seen some of his speeches, and we incorporate that in our presentations at conferences like this, where he gets up and talks about how he's such a great entrepreneur and how the government money's like a fire hose that will never go off because there'll always be problem kids and there'll always be government money. But he also says, you can't make profit unless you cut costs. And that means cut costs. And that's inevitably, you're not going to have as many employees as you should have. They're not going to be trained at all. There's going to be low wage employees. So it's all about money regardless of it. There's a lot of private equity involved in these facilities. Altamont's involved. There's some big players. UHS, Universal Healthcare, they're a big operator, and they're a Fortune 500 company.
Is there a dollar figure? Like when we talk about this class of facilities, they're a specific sort of like a class, right? I mean, they're supposedly schools, but they're schools for troubled teens. I mean, talk to me about the revenue, and then I want to talk about like sort of the cohort of kids that go in there in terms of ages.
Yeah, and when you say school, I get sidetracked on that. School is a very loose term, and education is very loosely used in these places. They claim to provide education, and we've got some lawsuits pending down in Alabama in federal court right now. The DOJ came down to Alabama and said the children in these types of facilities are not receiving adequate education and not receiving the education that their non-disabled peers are receiving. I know I kind of got off into the
we'll get into that because that has to do with the sort of some of the legal theories that you are using to protect the rights of these kids.
But how much of a business? I mean, how big of a business? How many?
The government, the figures that the government is paying into this is $23 billion a year.
Wow,
and that's just government funding. So the program, it doesn't really have a good side. In that documentary, they say a total of it's about a $50 to $60 billion industry a year. I mean, up to 200,000 kids are affected by this on a yearly basis. There are approximately 10,000, quote, troubled teen industry facilities in the U.S.
Wow.
Okay. And that includes, like I said, boot camps, boarding schools, therapeutic boarding schools, wilderness camps, ranches. They're called all kind of things. And they're everywhere.
We should just say you're referencing a couple of times. There's a documentary on Netflix called The Program: Cons, Cults, and Kidnapping, which apparently is quite a hit. And that is a sort of a segment of the type of things that you do in this instance. So how old are the kids that you have represented or that are representable, I guess?
I've got a client as young as, I've had clients as young as 6. I've got a current client who's 11 who was beaten severely in a UHS facility on multiple occasions by staff.
Oh,
and the child services, and they came down and investigated, and they confirmed it was going on. And I won't get into the games defense lawyers are playing in that game, but up to 19. In Alabama, you don't hit the age of majority until 19.
Okay, and so when you've got a 6-year-old, I mean, how do you end up representing a 6-year-old? Do the parents come to you and say, like, we think there's a problem here?
Yes, and sadly, in the case of the 6-year-old, he was sexually abused by a roommate in one of these facilities, and that's a UHS.
How does a 6-year-old end up in a facility like this? Like, and what is a 6-year-old capable of doing that makes everybody sort of agree, like, this person needs to be sent away?
It makes no sense. It made no sense to the parents of this child. The child was having issues, but certainly not issues where he should be placed in a psychological facility. The state did.
Oh, okay.
The state did. So there's your answer. I mean, especially in a state like Alabama, is, we're not, well, I could say a lot of things about that, but I don't know if we want to talk about Alabama today, but it's baffling to me. It's baffling.
And so the parents will come to you in that situation and say, you know what, the state came, and the kid maybe had problems at school, it sounds like,
yes.
And then the state gets involved and they say he's got to go to one of these facilities. What's the relationship when we're talking about, private facilities? I can, it seems a little bit more of a direct line, right? The parents are at the wit's end. They don't know what to do. They go to, they get some advice from somebody, and they send their kids there without really necessarily knowing, what's up behind the curtain, I guess. When the state's involved, like, how much of the relationship between the state and, Child Protective Services, I think, sort of cuts both ways. It seems to me, obviously, it's very important in certain situations to protect children. But I also imagine that there are moneyed interests who step in and will lobby the state, will develop relationships with politicians in the state who then say to Child Protective Services, like, this is where we're gonna contract with this outfit, and that's where the funnel's gonna.
Oh yeah, the big operators, and we always ask for this in discovery in our cases. The big operators wine and dine politicians. They wine and dine people in the juvenile justice system. They wine and dine the people at Child Protective Services. So yeah, so you'll send them to our place. Yeah, that happens. That's common.
All right. So what are the different theories in which you go in and sue, and what is it that what ends up being the remedy?
Primarily, the cases I've handled over the year have been personal injury cases, and those range anywhere from serious injury as a result of assaults. I mean, but it's got to be for us to handle. I mean, obviously serious injury, because I get calls all the time, Sam, on these cases, and sadly I can't help them because cost of litigation versus return, we just can't do it. So we think some of the part of bringing awareness to this is hopefully going to help change the whole system. But I've had cases from broken bones, broken teeth, all the way up to just horrible sexual abuse cases, from gang rape to roommate raping their roommate, like this little boy, up to death cases, with assaults from staff causing these problems, and suicide cases. It's just a wide variety of things going on in these facilities. I mean, in addition to that, claims that we bring, they put them in isolation for ungodly amounts of time. Sometimes 2 weeks at a time, they'll put them in there and barely feed them, and won't let them use the restroom properly. Just horrible things. They use unlawful restraints on these children, and they say restraints, but to me they're outright assaults because they're not trained in proper restraints. You're not supposed to restrain one of these children unless they're a harm to themselves or a harm to others. And they just, if they're not happy with the child, they'll take the child down, and oftentimes they're hurt like this. What's crazy in these cases, and we hear about it all the time, is staff in these facilities, if they don't like a child, or if a child's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they will put a bounty out on that child and basically say, and they call it putting snacks on his head or snacks on her head. They give extra privileges to other children, give them extra snacks, whatever, to basically beat up another child. And sometimes in these places, they leave the discipline up to the other children. It's crazy. People who haven't watched the program, I highly suggest you watch it, because this is happening all over the country, and it's kind of starting to get the attention it deserves.
Are there instances where they're prescribing drugs? I mean, it could be to the children as a way of basically, drugs that aren't necessarily called for, but will, keep them, more manageable.
Oh yeah. When I see the medication charts for my clients, it's just, how can a child be on this much medication and even be awake? And they're not. I mean, they're zombies. I mean,
this seems to me to be sort of, there's a parallel with nursing homes. It seems to me, where, it's behind a curtain. You don't know what's going to happen. You put your parents in there, and they're understaffed more often than not because they want to make profits. And the way they do that is, instead of like having, I don't know what the proper staffing would be, 1 to 5 patients, it's 1 to 30 patients, and they take care of the other patients by basically just giving them enough whatever drugs it is, antipsychotics or other drugs, to basically make them completely docile, so they don't really require the same level of care.
And like you said, there's a wall of silence in these places. I mean, it's people, that's what we try to do in all these cases. Every case I get gets a lot of media attention, and we want to shed a light on what's going on in these places, because they need sunshine, and they're finally starting to get it to some extent. They're making children in these places do their landscaping, their maintenance, their cleaning. So I brought, along with some other attorneys, forced labor in child labor cases, class actions against some of these operators, because that's going on in a lot of these places as well.
Are there state regulatory agencies? Are there federal regulatory? Are there licensing requirements? Like what?
That's a great point, because, and I'll give you Alabama, for example, even though I'm familiar with a lot of them now, because there has been a lot of change in the laws that affect these facilities. Alabama, for instance, has a wonderfully written laws on this topic, but there's no enforcement. There's no teeth to it. It's not happening. And we're actually in the legislature right now trying to bring change with Levin, Papantonio, and others. We're going to the legislature saying, put some teeth into this. Paris Hilton's involved in this movement, and she's helped get the laws changed to strengthen it in Utah, in Montana, in Oregon, and a few other states. They're making good change. Now, federally, there's something called SICA right now, Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. Now, Paris Hilton is supporting this. It's a bipartisan support right now. You got Tommy Tuberville from my state, who is supporting it along with Democrats, and that's another whole issue for another day on the Hope.
Yeah,
but so that's a bipartisan issue. But I hope it passes, because it brings awareness to the situation. Paris has been up to Capitol Hill talking about it. She was here at MTMP 6 months ago. We were up talking about it. But what that's going to do is kind of just form some work groups for best practices and make these places be more transparent in what they do and share numbers.
But there's no agency
but there's
that
going to
comes
be
in.
nothing, right? There's no national law that really regulates. So at best, that's a start.
Is there, what would be the model for, and then I want to get to sort of the legal theories that you're using to get to so at the very least hold these places accountable and then hopefully make it somewhat unprofitable. I mean, that's sort of the only thing that you guys are able to do is sort of like, almost like, I mean, I've heard attorneys like yourself referred to as almost like private AGs on some level, coming in, trying to change the industry by reshaping the incentive structure here. But if you were going to have an agency that would police these facilities, what would it be modeled on? Would it be sort of like, I don't know, like EPA enforcement or labor enforcement or FDA or is there anything out there that would provide the appropriate model for this?
Well, I don't know about the model, but what could happen in our state is DHR, which is Child and Family Services in that state, they inspect these places every 4 months. They're supposed to. And if they're not meeting expectations, not meeting what they're supposed to be doing, not educating children like they're supposed to be doing, if there's rampant abuse and neglect, pull their license.
Right.
That's how you do it. That's how the state does it. But like you were saying on our end, I mean, whatever theories we're using, and there are a lot of them in these cases, I mean, we're going after money damages in every single one of them. And we've had good success doing that. I mean, and I think that's the way to bring the rapid change is to hit them in the pocketbook over and over again. And then either put them out of business or they're going to change their ways. They're going to start hiring qualified people. They claim in our cases that these are medical providers, medical facilities. That's how they always defend these cases and say that these are medical malpractice cases. Tell me how they're medical malpractice cases when in one of my cases, a lady for no reason who's an employee at a facility throws down my client because she had called the police saying, I'm getting abused in here. Other children are getting abused in here. Please come help us. Well, the police are on their way. My client's just walking around the room. This is all on video. And a worker comes up and tackles her, throws her to the ground, and the rest of the residents come beat the hell out of her, including breaking her jaw and dislocating her shoulder. And they claim that's a medical malpractice case. Our state Supreme Court agreed with them and said that is a medical malpractice case. This happened last week. We were devastated by it because we had another case that's very similar, a suicide case in one of these facilities, they said was not a medical malpractice case. Those two don't jive. So we're still to the point where we can appeal it again. So we haven't, we're still in court.
Alabama State Supreme Court, is that an elected position?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's elected position. And that's where, the unfortunate.
There's a lot of influence, I would imagine, in those races and interference in those races. And you got funders and, I think.
Well, I mean, we had the IVF come out. Unfortunate opinion, come out a few weeks ago that got national attention.
So what are the big sort of theories in which you're, and we should say, like, in general, these type of, with a lot of the plaintiffs' attorneys here, almost all, there is a statutory requirement and the private AGs, if you will, go in and use that statutory, and basically they function as a third party coming in and saying, my client is not being treated or the service they're providing is not following the law. And this is how you get like a civil judgment. What are the theories of these cases that you use?
Right. In our injury cases and wrongful death cases, sex abuse cases, that's just straight tort law, straight negligence, wantonness, and intentional or reckless conduct. Now, the interesting theory that we're coming at them with now is these education cases that I briefly discussed in Alabama. And we're kind of using a trial balloon in Alabama to see what happens, but we're suing the Department of Education, Department of Child and Family Services, DHR in Alabama, and the heads of those entities, claiming that they're violating the American with Disabilities Act, which they are. The Department of Justice came down and said that children who live in these facilities that the state has placed, children that the state has placed in these facilities, are not receiving adequate education. They're not receiving education as their peers who are not in these facilities are receiving. they're not even evaluating these children when they are admitted into one of these facilities. What grade level are you on? Are you able to go to public school? Oftentimes, the DOJ said it, the vast majority of the children in these facilities could be going to public school. I mean, these aren't bad kids. They're not a threat to themselves or others, or they'd be at a lockdown facility. These aren't lockdown facilities. They have some behavioral problems sometimes. There are a lot of kids with behavioral problems that are currently in public and private schools across the country. These children, and that's what we're arguing, is it's in the education they are getting in these facilities is pathetic. It's pitiful. There's worksheets. I mean, we were in federal court last week in Montgomery before a district judge, and he said, what age kids are in these facilities? Well, you'd have kindergartners in there and seniors. Well, asked defense counsel, how do you educate them? I mean, that's a good question, because
do you have kindergarten teachers and
no, and they don't even have certified teachers. And this is in lawyer speak. This is what the DOJ said. They said these teachers, they're not certified by the state. They don't have opportunities to do extracurricular activities. They don't have gyms. They don't have things like that. They work off the same worksheet, regardless of what grade level they're in. And these children are being stunted for life. I mean, our clients all, it's affected them for the rest of their lives because they've gotten so far behind. And if they had received the education that they're entitled to,
so just so I'm clear, they, in admitting them,
right,
they are categorized as having some form of disability, and then they fall under the rubric of federal law, which says that if it's established that this child has a disability, whether it's emotional or mental or physical for that matter, there's still an obligation to provide them with the same quality of public education as non-disabled children.
Exactly.
And that's not happening in those instances. And so what is the remedy for that? Is it, I mean, obviously you're like, how do you determine what the damages are in that situation?
Yeah, well, we've hired vocational experts who are going to go in, just like in, catastrophic car accidents, when, products liability cases, someone's a quadriplegic, they'll have a vocational expert come in. And I've had those cases too, where they'll basically evaluate what's it going to cost for the rest of his or her life, or the care that it will cost them to survive and live. And it's kind of like this: what would this child, if average out with children his age that were given that opportunity, and these vocational experts can do all that and say this child would have made this kind of money and that. And we're also, we're at motion to dismiss stage right now, and that's what the hearing was on last week. Whether or not we get to go to court, basically. And the judge, we've got to amend some things, but he indicated the case is going to be valid and going to go forward. And once he does rule for us, knock on wood, we've got 6 clients now. This affects thousands of children in Alabama. So we've got a lot of cases in the holster.
So if
we want to get it, ultimately we want to get a change made. Now for our clients, we want to get them compensated as well. But I think when the state sees this amount of lawsuits coming at them, and based on the DOJ coming after them as well, they're going to have to straighten up. They're going to have to change this. It's going to cost them a lot of money.
Now this is yours the first case to turn on this theory?
Yes.
And so in the event that the court finds that they make 2 essential broad rulings, right? The first one is this a theory under which an action can be brought? And then the second is establishing what the damages are and whether they're culpable because for what the school is doing. But once they establish that this is a theory that can be brought, it opens up all these other cases. Would that also happen nationally? Or, I would imagine on some level, you've got a lawyer who's going to go like, this is happening in Alabama, I'm in Massachusetts, or I'm in New York, or wherever it is. It's going to be in my brief. And they will present that brief. They'll use it in other cases. What would be the damages in that situation?
Right, the damages, and if we have success in this case, it certainly will set precedent for this to be a theory in other states. But because the DOJ came to Alabama, that kind of made it simpler, so we could parallel their findings in our case. what we're trying to obtain through these suits is for the individual clients money damages for basically we'll have someone come, an expert come evaluate if these children had been given the opportunities that they're required to be given under the law, their success, and then these experts, they have all the tables as to, certain grade level student with certain grades, this is his trajectory. And then once that's stifled or stunted by the state, in our case, and by the facilities the owners of these facilities, we'll be able to extrapolate basically lost income over the year. And there's some things we can't quantify, but these experts are good at what they do. But ultimately, if we're successful in these cases, if we get past the motion to dismiss stage, there's going to be a flood of cases. We've only brought 6 kind of as the test case, but thousands of children across Alabama were damaged as a result of this.
And lastly, is the DOJ, are they involved in other states?
They came down to Alabama based on specific complaints. I don't know if they're expanding that or not. There has not been a resolution yet between the DOJ and the state of Alabama in these cases. So they're probably going to start following our cases because I said it earlier, this is going to cost the state a whole lot of money when we start having a whole lot of clients filing these cases. And the state does not want to get into a position either of discovery. They don't want us getting into their records to see what's really going on in these cases, who's getting paid, how they're getting paid, why they're paying these certain facilities to do this, why they're not requiring them to do what they're supposed to be doing under the law. So it's problems for everybody. And it's going to cost the state a whole lot of money when we have thousands of lawsuits starting to pile up.
And once they realize that, it's going to be cheaper for them to actually hold these.
Exactly. Evaluate the children when they go into these facilities. So they'll be able to tell, can this child go to public school? Can he at least go to public school for a part of the day? Things like that. And the interesting thing about this is again, going back to that show, The Program on Netflix, this facility, which again is kind of a private pay where parents are paying money to send their children to Ivy Ridge Academy, came out in that documentary. These kids, and it shows them they're getting their diploma and they're walking when they graduate the program. They weren't certified by anyone. The state of New York did not certify this place at all. Those diplomas were worth nothing, zero.
Wow.
Zip. It's a scam. I mean, this whole industry is a scam, and it's hurting our most vulnerable children. And I'm so happy that it's getting I appreciate you covering this, Sam, because the more attention this gets when people watch the program, the show on Netflix, it's going to open their eyes. It's going to infuriate people, and it's already happening. It's on Twitter. There are other documentaries out there. There are podcasts out there on this topic now. So it's satisfying to see what I've been doing for 20 years and been seeing for 20 years kind of coming to the light.
Tommy James Law will put a link to your firm, and if we have any other information, maybe you can give me afterwards where people can get more information on this problem. And of course, we'll link to the program on Netflix.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure, yes.
There's a great organization who advocates for these children as well called Unsilenced. Unsilenced.org. I believe it could be Unsilenced, but Meg Applegate is the CEO of Unsilenced. She's a survivor of one of these places, and they have a database of thousands of these facilities. You can look up the facilities. It has articles, lawsuits, reports on the facilities, the camps, whatever.
So people can do some vetting before they engage in.
Well, that's what people ask me, what should I do? Parents, what do you recommend if you can't, my child is having all these problems, and are there any good facilities out there? What else are they supposed to do? What else are we supposed to do? I said, I'm not smart enough to answer that question, but this isn't what you need to do.
Right.
But go to Unsilenced too, and you'll be able to get a lot of information on this topic, and you can help advocate if you want to get involved.
We'll link to that too. Awesome. Tommy James, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me.
We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland. I am in Las Vegas. I think it's pretty obvious with the room behind. Widen out. Give me a one shot here so people get a sense of just how glamorous this is in Las Vegas. Yeah, there it is.
That outlet. Oh my gosh. It's so exotic. I've never seen anything like that before.
That outlet was the outlet that Frank Sinatra used to plug in his one of his things that needed electricity.
So much history in such a young
wow. Yeah.
Yep.
He does
so much
it all.
history. I'm actually in a newer wing of the. Okay, you can go back to the single shot. I think we've I'm in the Wynn Hotel, and the Mass Torts Conference is starting today. I've actually got to head back tomorrow, but I want to get one day in worth of interviews, and I'll be back more than likely in October for more of these cases. But one of the things that I think is, in a moment, we're gonna play an interview I did with Mike Papantonio, who has taken to writing fiction books, I think, as a way of being able to express things that he's come across in cases that he would be barred from expressing. If that makes sense. As a lawyer, you come in, you make settlements, or you come to deals, or the court, fines for your client, and some of the stuff is sealed. Some of the stuff just doesn't come out, and I think this gives Papantonio an opportunity to sort of like put that in the record, but of course say that it's fiction. But his ideas come from that. But, these trial attorneys, it's been fascinating over the years, the range of trial attorneys here, because some are their innovation has been like an interesting phone number, like, 888 my law or whatever it is. Others, I interviewed Fred Gray, who was Rosa Parks' first attorney when she refused to get up off the seat. I mean, involved in that whole protest. So there's a wide range of attorneys here. For the most part, and certainly all the ones I interview, have a deep disdain for corporate America. And I really appreciate that. And it's born out of seeing these documents. And you'll hear Papantonio talk about it. He doesn't think very highly of these people as human beings. And they function as private attorney generals, essentially. And we saw the most recent of this, we saw in the National Real Estate Association case. And where did that come out of? Was that, I think it came out of Ohio, but I can't quite remember now. And essentially, a plaintiff attorney was representing a series of, real estate clients who had bought a house or something to that effect, and was suing on antitrust. Antitrust, it was Colorado, antitrust grounds. And now, of course, antitrust is, we have a series of laws, and these attorneys can use these laws. In fact, they need these laws as a way of actioning. And again, this is all civil stuff. But Papantonio makes a very strong argument that the DOJ needs to step up and bring criminal cases against these people when it's necessary. So here's my interview with Mike Papantonio. And I should say, Pap and I also talked about Air America for a couple of minutes beforehand. And when we release the full interview, we'll include that as well. But we're bumping up against time here, so I want to get to the heart of what Pap's talking about, also in regards to the book that he's written. And I haven't written it yet, but it was like #1 legal thriller on Amazon for a while, and it's doing well at Barnes and Noble, and it sounds like a great book. And again, worth reading to get a sense of like what it's really like, almost more so than what you hear from the real stories, because there's only so much of that can be made public. All right, but here is a significant portion of the interview with Mike Papantonio.
Well, all right, but let's talk about your book, because what I find fascinating about it. Well, first of all, we've talked about some of the books you've written in the past, but you use stories. They're based on stories. Once you go through a case, or if you settle certain things, obviously there's certain things that you are bound by the court. You can't reveal. However, there's opportunities to fictionalize things.
Yeah.
And in your latest work, I recognize, at least, and I don't know if you work directly on this, but certainly I know you guys, your firm does a lot of stuff where there's financial fraud involved and whatnot. But the story of HSBC's money laundering problems they had.
It's ridiculous to even speak those words, isn't it? That HSBC and a dozen other banks through Europe and America laundered money for terrorists and drug cartels. And when the smoke cleared, HSBC had signed a document that said this exactly: yes, we did launder money. Yes, we made billions of dollars doing it. Yes, we understood it was going to kill American contractors and American soldiers, European contractors, European soldiers. Yes, we did all those things, and gee whiz, we're willing to pay $1 billion to get out of it, $1.6 million. And so this was criminal. It was criminal conduct, you understand. There's no question the documents were overwhelming. And so Eric Holder allowed them to, and Loretta Lynch from the AG's office under Obama, allowed them to sign the document, and nobody went to prison. Okay? And that, to me, is kind of the salient part of this story. We represent a couple of thousand people that are in the what you call the gold family. They're people that their families they've lost their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, brothers.
Gold Star families.
Family. Yeah. And it's regarded as something else in the book, but it's what we're talking about. And so the problem is, until you say to corporate America, you can dress up all you want to dress up. You can put on the finest suits and drive the finest cars, but we're still going to perp walk you when you kill people. Same way with the opioid case. I wrote a book called Law and Addiction there, and it was all true. This case, this is a true story. I mean, has it been dressed up? Of course. The intensity's been added to it, but it's a true story. And so, but in this story, for example, the horrible thing about the bank story washing money is you had judges just awful decisions about how it's okay. We're going to allow banks to do that. That issue is literally up on appeal right now.
Well, I want to talk about this, from how it applies to the work that I know that you guys have done, and I know that Chris Paulos has provided some sort of like consulted and you work with in the firm.
He knows more about this than anybody.
And I think I've interviewed him about some of these topics in the past. But basically, the dynamic is this, and we should say with the HSBC, the part I remember about that story was that they had to literally change their teller windows.
That's right.
So to fit the boxes of money, of cash that were coming through from drug cartels.
Well, it wasn't just drug cartels. It was also front companies for terrorists.
And so basically what this is like, you can't, and I want to get into this because I think there's been some developments as to whether you can hold or how you hold, let's say, Iran, accountable for terrorist acts that have killed people. But a lot of times we're talking about oil companies, we're talking about banks, right. We're talking about maybe other companies that essentially evade sanctions and or essentially provide the mechanism for the funding of these terrorist acts.
Yeah, the law is very.
It costs money.
The law is very clear. After JASTA After 9/11, there was some law called JASTA. And basically, without going into too much detail, it's a law that says if you've participated in the furtherance of terrorism, you may be sued in a civil court. Okay? Or if you are on a terrorist list, if you're a country that's on a terrorist, you may be sued in civil court. So we've gotten, as you probably know, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars from Iran, and now everybody's in a holding pattern to try to get those judgments secured and executed on. But it will happen. But
these are assets that are frozen. They're in
correct.
U.S. banks, and they're basically kept there to ensure that in the event that there's a finding against them in a civil court, that they pay. It's more or less like, I don't know, like the bond that was required of Donald Trump recently.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so the problem is, though, Sam, I mean, you're always going to be able to take their money away. But what if one time, whether it was the opioid case, where 150 people died every day for decades, what if you throw a dozen of them in prison, and then an MBA school at Harvard or Yale or Princeton, 10 years from now, they said, you know what? Don't take a chance. Uncle Joe went to prison for 10 years. And that changes culture. Nobody goes to prison. You might remember, and when Obama was running for president, don't you remember he said, by God, I'm going to put these people in prison that caused the burn down. We know who they are. The evidence is overwhelming, and it was absolutely overwhelming. They knew they were stealing from mom and pop pension programs. Nobody went to prison. Why is that?
And, I think it was Eric Holder who had famously said, or maybe it was his number two, Lanny, I want to say Brewer. Maybe it was.
What a bomb. What an absolute bomb.
They said, not just too big to fail, but also like too big to jail.
Too big to jail. Oh, no, their big talking point was, after this promise, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to have an attorney general that does something. All of a sudden, within 2 months, the new talking point became we just have to look ahead.
Right,
we can't look back. But the risk in not looking back is it happens again. The risk in not putting these people in prison is it happens again. Suspicious activity analyzes it. And it does it in a way that it's fun reading. It's a good story. There's no way you're going to read this story and be bored. You're going to be entertained to the point I really think it's a page turner. It's gotten great reviews because it moves quickly. But so you're entertained, and at the same time, you're learning something that most people don't even know about.
Right.
They don't know how the banks have become, the criminality of these banks in the United States. This is just one example of it.
And is there something in here? I mean, because, for years, and I've been coming to this conference now for probably close to a decade, maybe more actually. We're getting old a little bit, but
I got more gray hair than you.
I don't know about that, but the theme has always been, for the most part, corporations are knowingly, essentially, allowing people to be harmed in the pursuit of their profits. And
because they can get away with it, Sam.
And, well, is there something about, do we have the laws on the books to go after these people criminally? Obviously, you're going after civilly.
Of course.
Or is there something in the structure of corporations that legally shields them?
There is not. There is not. The conduct could be interpreted just like any individual. Was there intent? Was there indicia of intent? Was there enough to present this indicia of intent to a jury? Should we allow the jury to decide rather than some politician making a call to people like Eric Holder, who, oh, by the way, is now working for Covington Burling?
Right.
You understand, that is the premier white-collar criminal firm in America. He has almost a whole damn floor up there, okay? So he goes from attorney general, where he lets all these white-collar criminals go, to working for the firm that helps engineer it all the time. And the problem, Sam, is we've become so tribal that we can't even analyze that objectively because, well, he's a Democrat. And, I'm a Democrat. And I can't talk about Obama or Holder and maybe something they did that was awful because I'm a Democrat. Republicans do the same thing.
Right,
I mean,
right.
both sides. But how do you...
But isn't part of the problem less about that people are saying it's because I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, but rather it's like, I work in business. Isn't there a mentality of like, well, corporations, it seems to me, are set up as a way of diffusing responsibility, both legally, but also I think like morally on some point. I've talked to people who work in, let's say, for-profit universities, which, is a pretty sketchy.
Oh, extremely sketchy.
Some of these are Fortune 500 companies.
I know.
And there is a sense, that we're doing good. We're trying to educate people, and they're sort of not paying attention to actually sort of like what the other part of this is, which is 99% of your money comes from the federal government and trying to keep people, to get their second check. And there's this sense of like, well, in my silo, I'm doing okay.
Yeah. In suspicious activity, what I tried to make everybody understand, and understand, I've handled the biggest cases in the country.
Yes.
I handled tobacco. I handled opioids. I handled PFAS. I handled 80 of the largest pharmaceutical cases in the country. And here's what people don't get. Most of the time, when the conduct is really bad, like we're working the CPAP case right now, my God, you should read the documents. As you read the documents, you realize the person on the other side of the table from you is a sociopath. And we can't even process that because it's too painful to believe that we have a system in this country that's so wholly unchecked that we can allow a sociopath to make a decision that kills 150 people a day and that there's no finding of responsibility. That in the opioid case, yeah, they settled for $52 billion. So what? They made $100 billion a year. Okay.
It's the functional equivalent of like, I've got to buy these microphones to do this show.
And you really want to hear the suffering? Who pays for the $52 billion? Taxpayers.
Right.
Because they write it off and taxpayers pay for it. But we've become, I really, and I hate to say this.
They write this, I just want to be clear on this. When they are paying a fine, or in the instance of they're paying a civil liability, it's a tax write-off, like it's an expense.
The only thing that's not is the punitive damages. But
okay.
Most of it is a write-off. And so how do we turn that around? I mean, like I say, most of the time when I'm across the table, I realize if I had a DSM-5 in front of me and I'm doing check to a sociopath, that's what I'm talking to. But it's become the norm. And I think we've reached the point of no return. Okay. Both political parties have had a shot to try to do something about it. You want to hear real irony, Sam? The last president of this country that did anything about it was Ronald Reagan. He sent 800 bankers to prison. 800 over the
savings and
SML,
loans? Yeah.
savings and loan. Sent them to prison.
Yep.
Now, that's unheard of. And then all of a sudden, we start saying, well, okay, we can't do that because, well, there's no answer to because. The because part is because the Department of Justice is, they're just beat down with lawyers who are career lawyers. Why are they going to take on a tough case? I mean, they're going to get paid the same thing day in, day out, whatever the GS, whatever that is. I don't know what it is. But so they're going to make the same salary. Or the other part of them, the other part of that group is looking for a bigger job. You see?
Right.
So how do you get the Department of Justice to say, jump in there, buddy, do something? Yes, you might lose the case. That's what we do as trial lawyers. We might lose the case, but if we don't take a chance on it and we don't take a shot, nothing in this country changes. And I hate to even say this, but I think we have reached the point of no return.
I want to get back to that. It's a little bit it's
a
little
disheartening. It's disheartening.
I don't know if you ever read that book, The Chicken Shit Club by Jesse Ettinger.
I did.
He is a ProPublica writer who wrote about essentially the failures of the Holder regime to go after corporate criminals in that respect.
ProPublica did the best job handling that topic. Them and a woman named Lerner, who was just excellent on it.
And what makes you, when you say that we're past the point of no return, does that mean that there's never an opportunity where there's going to be, I mean, because for instance, you know, we're watching sort of the revival of antitrust. Not the same necessarily thing, but we're watching a revival of it. You can't turn
antitrust doesn't put anybody in prison.
No, I agree.
All it does is it arms the Department of Justice with more money. They get to keep money. You see, they hit a criminal and they hit a big fine. That money goes to the Department of Justice. It disappears somewhere. I mean, somewhere in the governmental process. But nobody goes to prison.
Nobody goes to prison. But my point being that you had a very dormant sort of aspect of our law where you could allow these companies to merge and to acquire each other and to become monopolies. And that's, you know, it's a long process, but that has reversed. I mean, it really is 180 degrees from where we were even, you know, 10 years ago, 5 years ago in terms of antitrust. And I wonder if we can't get there with corporate accountability.
There is no such thing as a corporate accountability, Sam. I mean, I know you don't want to hear this. People don't want to hear what I know. Of course you don't.
I want to hear that.
Nobody wants to hear this. I've been doing it for 40 years. I've been in the courtroom more than any trial lawyer you will talk to for 40 years confronting this. And I went through the time when I was optimistic. I was always waiting for that political party, that leader to rise up and say, damn it, this is not fair to the American public. It's a total double standard because some kid in a hoodie selling 10 ounces of marijuana is going to go to prison for 10 years. And we're letting people kill people just in reckless abandon. There's no mistake here, Sam. When you read these documents, I read them and I have to live with these documents day to day. And suspicious activity, those are documents we see. And the way they thumb their nose at the justice process. They know, so what? So what we get caught? So what we pay $1 billion? Nobody goes to prison. Now, you tell me, do you see any vision of somebody rising up and saying, I'm going to change all that?
No,
I don't either.
No, I don't. And in fact, you know, like I think, and I will say that even as my attempt to be hopeful, you could see the antitrust movement building over the past 10 years. I mean, it was there and it was on the outside.
Antitrust is a civil process.
I'm making more of a general analogy that we saw a change in enforcement. Granted, it's not criminal enforcement, but it's a change in enforcement. It's a change in an orientation on that law. And
we still see you understand, we determine after Citizens United that a corporation is a person.
Right.
Right? After 5 cases that came after Citizens United, we make the declaration that a corporation is a person. If you had a psychopath that had killed thousands of people, you put the psychopath in prison. You don't say to the psychopath, you know, you pay us $100 million, you're going to walk free. It doesn't change anything, Sam. And I'd love to say there's a quick solution here, but there's not. It is so much a part of our culture. And the people listening to this go, God, that sounds awful. And there's got to be better news here. I would love to deliver better news. I don't know where it is. I have no vision of it. The most optimism I ever had was when Obama made this ridiculous proclamation that he was going to do something to change it. And then he gets in office and realizes all this money comes from these very people that he's talking about. Do you realize even his appointments to the federal bench, his appointments came from these silk stocking law firms that represent these corporate criminals? Those were his appointments. 3/4 of his appointments.
Totally. And do you think that Biden has, at least in terms of like the federal judiciary, since you raised it, has done a better job in that respect?
I think his balance has been better. I do believe that. I think he's, you know, it's kind of his appointments. Sometimes you see they're, public defenders, or they come from the trial, they come from real trial experience. And that's great. That's important. But until a judge, and look, don't miss this either. A judge has the ability to say to the damn Justice Department, do something.
Right.
Okay? I've reviewed this case, do something. Do you know how few judges do that? Even to get to that part?
And part of that is because they come from all of these law firms, and it's just the water that they swim in. They're not even aware that it's necessarily that there's an issue here.
Of course not. They've made all of their money. They've never represented a consumer. They've always been on the side of a corporation. Can you imagine, Sam, being the lawyer for a corporation, and your best day, your day of success, is sitting around the dinner table at night and telling your children that you had a really good day today because you kept 1,000 people from recovering money after you know that the company you represent killed them and maimed them. That's your good day. But they're lining up to do that in this country right now.
Well, Mike Papantonio, does the book have a happy ending?
The book has
Suspicious Activity.
The book has all of my books have a happy. And you know why, Sam? You know why?
We need it.
We need it because every day we wake up with these realities, and we're thinking to ourselves, "Damn it, let the good guys win." Not only do the good guys win in this, but they wreak havoc on the bad guys. And that's how all my books end, because it gives you a sense that there's a possibility that at least you can read a book and think, I had a good day today.
But it is, I will say this, it is also important to be able to imagine a system of government and a society that holds these people to account. I mean, that's
to visualize it, right? Exactly. You have to visualize it before it even becomes a possibility.
We will put a link to Suspicious Activity, a legal thriller, at majority.fm, and of course in the podcast and YouTube description. Mike Papantonio, always a pleasure. So glad to catch you up, and congratulations on the book. It is really burning up the charts, and so I'm glad to see that.
And they will like the ending. They will empower them, even though reality may shun them. It will empower them.
Fantastic.
Thank
Mike
you.
Papantonio, again, thanks so much. And so I should just remind people, Mike Papantonio from Levin, Papantonio, Rafferty. He, again, one of the top plaintiff's attorney in the country, and it was my work on Ring of Fire with him that brought me to this conference 10 years ago at a minimum. Maybe it's been close to 12, 14 years I've been coming to this. We should try and put together a playlist of on YouTube. We'll talk to Dorsey about that, of some of these interviews, because some of them have been really incredible interviews. Some that have been very disturbing, frankly. And product liability, both in terms of like expanding the law, in terms of we did some interviews when New York State and other states basically gave a year-long grace period for any type of sexual assault cases that had happened in the past. And the statute of limitations had run out. That's how you had a lot of accountability for clergy members, coaches, or anybody for that matter, who had, abused kids, sexually abused them when they were young. And it ultimately, there was an opportunity there. So it's definitely worth going back and listening to some of those interviews. In a moment, I'm anticipating another guest,
just waiting at the door, looking at the door. It's pretty lonely in this room. It's a big room. There's nobody else here. Occasionally strangers poke their head in and wonder what I'm doing. Even as obvious it is that I have a microphone, people are wondering what's going on. I always like to give an up. I always like to give an update on how my gambling is going.
Oh, yes.
I have upped my blackjack game and can now add up to 21 almost in any circumstance possible.
That's good for the game.
3 cards, 4 cards, 5 cards, I can add. I've gotten to the point where I can add many of those cards. And so that's a big advantage from where I was. Not necessarily one that wins, but it's a big advantage.
Look at Rain Man over here.
Yep. It's I've really arrived. All right. Well, let's do this
this quick story.
Here we go. Here we go. All right, come sit down. Joining me now is Andy Childers. He is an attorney with Levin, Papantonio and Rafferty. Here, slide right over here, Andy, if you could. Even a little further, if you don't mind. There you go. And yeah, this my seat seems to be much higher than yours.
You did that on purpose?
I did not do that on purpose.
Power play, Sam.
But yeah, this is the way that I maintain, a little bit dominance. Right. All right. So Emma, we'll throw to Andy here, and joining me now, Andy Childers, attorney at Levin, Papantonio, Rafferty. In Florida, we were just about to talk about the Supreme Court ruling about the abortion ban there and the referendum. But you, and I think we've talked in the past a little bit about this case. I'm not 100% sure, but you are working on a case that is a medical, or just simply a product case that
it's a product case.
Was providing nutrients to premature babies. Here,
that's right.
You getting sound, guys?
Yep. That sounds good.
The case involves preterm infant formula for preterm babies, generally under 34 weeks gestational age. Cow's milk-based formula is generally that's how formula is made for the most part. And for premature babies, for some reason, for scientific reasons, they have a hard time digesting cow's milk enzymes. Results in infection, swelling, death of the intestines, called necrotizing enterocolitis, which is as bad as it sounds. Happens to about 10% of preterm kids.
Wow.
Yeah, didn't 10%. Know that, did you? Yeah.
That is a huge number.
Right.
That is not someone has a particular sensitivity. That is like a structural issue, it seems to me, that right. If you're premature baby, I mean, on some level, it makes sense. You're digestive. I would imagine many of your systems are not ready yet. I mean, you're premature, right. But 10% seems like
I think it's extraordinarily high. And then from that 10%, you have about 50% who need to have surgery, and surgery involves taking out part or all of the intestine, and oftentimes results in death of the infant.
Oh, geez.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay. And this is a product that was designed specifically for premature babies?
Correct. So
how long is the product? Give us a little background on this product. How long it's been on the market, and what are what it is its competitors, or what who developed it, et cetera.
So there's 2 companies, and if anyone here has had a child, they've heard of Enfamil, which is made by Mead. That's their formula line. And Similac, which is made by Abbott. That's their formula line. For full-term babies, they don't have an issue to digest it. They make specific formulas for preterm infants. They're supposed to have more nutrients specific, to help them with the growth that they didn't get in the womb. But along with that, the cow's milk enzymes cause damage to the intestine, whereas mother's own milk, breastfeeding, you don't have that same problem.
Right.
The rub of it is you can make formula with human milk. There are donor banks, there are companies that make it. These two companies have chosen for business purposes not to do that. And this has been ongoing for decades, but it's been very well known to the companies for at least 15 years.
Okay, so they have been making a special version of their baby formula for premature babies. When were these introduced? And then when did it become clear at one point that 10% of the premature babies were suffering from adverse effects?
Sure.
And then we'll get into like how long they knew and what are the elements you need to prove for a case.
So infant formula in that sort of format has been around about 40 years, maybe a little longer than that. The science, though, on this particular condition evolved over time. As early as 1990, there were some studies out showing that babies who were formula fed had a significantly higher incidence rate for
premature babies.
Had a significantly higher incidence rate for, we call it NEC, necrotizing enterocolitis, than babies who were fed their mother's own breast milk. That was known.
And we should say it's also, I would imagine, very difficult for premature babies to latch so it's not necessarily easy to drink. It's not just a function of the mother, can't pump or whatever. It's a function of the babies has trouble latching on too. So it's
with these babies, you typically don't have, what you have is mom pumps.
Okay.
And then they're fed through a tube enterally into the gut. And so you're not really dealing with the latching issue that young, but getting human milk into their systems is much safer than putting in a product that's made with cow's milk. This comes as no surprise to you. I'm sure that we're the only species that drinks another species' milk.
Right.
That's it. That's it. No other species does that. Cow's milk's not designed for us. We tolerate it better as adults because we have the ability to, but those preterm infants do not have that ability.
And so they've been getting this special premature baby formula for about 40 years. And it was, I guess, 10 years into it or so where there became an awareness of this problem. At what point, and then, so tell us the elements that you have to prove. And then we'll get to at what point, who knew what?
Sure.
Because I would imagine 40, 50, as time goes on, there's a sense of a certain percentage of premature babies have problems and complications. That's one of the dangers of having a premature baby. What to attribute it to? At what point did it become clear what you could attribute at least that, set of problems?
It appears to us, at least in the early 2000s, that became clear that there was this very significant difference in the incidence rate with formula versus breast milk.
And how does that was there a process? I would imagine there's not necessarily maybe there is specific records of I have a premature baby, the nurse marks down the ingredients that they're being fed, and there's no central database. Was that part of the problem in terms of how you assess this data and then come to this conclusion? We're starting to see a correlation, and then at one point we're starting to see a causation.
Well, the records generally are clear if the baby is getting formula or the baby's getting breast milk.
Okay.
That's not an issue. Where we see some lack of clarity is if they get formula, was it Similac or was it Enfamil? That's not always clear, but not surprisingly, the companies keep very specific track of which hospitals they have contracts with, how much product they send there, and how much product the hospitals are using. The contracts that they have with them require that the hospital uses a certain percentage of their product in their NICU.
So it becomes clear in the early aughts that there is a correlation, and then what?
So then, in 2006, the very first product came out that was a formula type product that was made with human milk. They did a study, that company, comparing their product to cow's milk based formula and showed very significant difference in the incidence of this particular condition.
Okay. And so when you guys go in with a case and you have clients, I guess, all across the country, one of the things that distinguishes a mass tort from a class action is that they all suffered from the same cause, but how they suffered was distinct from person to person.
Right. And the injuries that resulted are always different person to person.
Okay. And so at what point, what are the elements that you have to prove for these companies to have liability in this situation?
So we basically have two claims. One is failure to warn, meaning they didn't put on their product or send information to doctors and parents the significance of the increased risk using this product. That's one. Our other claim is design defect. The claim there is this product is unreasonably dangerous for this subset of infants. Some states we have to show that there was another way to make it, that it is safer. Well, I just told you in 2006 that product came out. So we know that it's possible to do, and it has been continued to be done since that time.
Do you have to prove knowledge that these companies had knowledge that their product was problematic, or do you need to prove that they had a duty? And there's some standard that like a reasonable person would know in this situation, or I mean, if you're in the business of making products for babies, you're not just a reasonable person. You're right. Like, I'm a professional and I theoretically know what I'm doing here. Like, what elements do you have to prove?
So we have to show that they knew or should have known of the danger using this particular type of formula with this subset of preterm infants.
And does your claim start at 2006 when this study came out, or are they obligated to have known that 1990 because of certain studies, or 1995, or when does that happen?
So I would say the different claims are different time frames. Failure to warn, as soon as they knew of an association, they should be telling doctors and patients and parents, there's a risk here, and this is what we know about it. Design defect, I think 2006 is pretty easy to show because another company was able to make a safer product. At that point, you knew there was a safer design for these kids, and you chose not to go that route.
So in one instance, it's really just one is we're not sure that there's a causal link between this, but we know there's like some correlation of problem or an association. We know that 10% of children, we don't know for sure that it's our product, but it's possible. And so we just want to give you a heads up about that. At what time would that have happened? Like when you go back, because this is going to impact the pool of potential clients, right?
Correct. So it's case dependent. It needs to have happened before your particular infant in that case was diagnosed with NEC. And in our belief, anything that happened after the study that came out in 1990, they're on notice. They could have warned about that. Since that time, study after study after study has come out, so it's just increased knowledge. So they could argue that maybe back then we didn't know, but there's a certain point where it really becomes hard for them to say, we really didn't know this was happening. What they are doing instead is saying, well, this is well known. Doctors already knew this. So we didn't have to then also warn them about it, which is really not accurate. If you know there's a problem, you're required to warn about it if you make a product that's causing it or associated with it.
Is there now at one point you go into discovery, right? I mean, in the course of this case, and I'll ask you in a moment, like where you are in this case. But you go into discovery and you find like, oh, these guys had done there was discussion about this in 1985. Like here's, Bill Stevens talking to, Mary Jones, and Bill Stevens says, hey, I'm a little concerned that maybe there's a correlation here between, 10% of these premature babies and their digestive systems and our product. Aren't you worried, Mary? No, Bill, I'm not. I wouldn't worry about it. Like, if you were to find an email like that, and I don't know, email in 1985, possibly, but or a document, does that change everything at that point?
Certainly shows they had knowledge,
right,
which is the element for failure to warn, and would be part of the elements for the design defect claim too. Because at some point you have to start figuring out how do you make the product safer if you know it's already dangerous. Maybe you can't. Some products you can't. This is a product that can be made safer.
And even if you couldn't make it safer, you still have an obligation of warning,
correct,
right?
That is absolutely
And so
correct.
the second claim maybe wouldn't be as operative, but the first claim still would be.
Correct.
Okay, so where are we in this case, and how many clients do you have, or potential clients are out there?
So we sort of have two different tracks running. There's a state court litigation, and then we're in the federal court as well. In federal court, which is where I primarily am practicing in these cases, we are still in discovery. We're still taking depositions of people who work at the companies, getting ready to start taking depositions for specific plaintiffs whose cases will be prepared for trial. And we're scheduled to have that done at the end of June. In state court, they actually just tried their first case. So they've already gone to trial.
Which state is this?
This was in Illinois.
Okay. And why Illinois? Is that where these companies are from, or is that where plaintiffs are?
The plaintiff was in that state, and at the time they filed the case, the defendant, Meade Johnson, also was residing in Illinois.
Okay.
So they kept it in state court. And that case resulted in a $60 million verdict for the plaintiff. So pretty significant. And one thing that I think is extraordinary as a trial lawyer, my understanding, and I have read the transcript, so it's not just my understanding, but this is what the plaintiffs asked for: $25 million. The jury gave them 60. That's almost unheard of, to get more than twice as much as you ask a jury to award. So clearly the evidence the jury saw showed them that the company was very derelict in what they had done, and probably made decisions that they knew were going to be adverse to these children.
Okay, so what happens? There's one case where one plaintiff gets $60 million, and there's an awareness that the pool of potential victims could be X number of people. I don't know. Maybe you have a sense of how many of those people are.
So currently we've got about 400 cases in the MDL, probably similar in state court. I don't know the exact number there, but I think I know the number of children who get this condition in the U.S. every year is about 9,000.
Wow. Okay. So, and there's only 400 because parents of these children aren't aware that this is they're not even aware at this stage that this
Correct.
Could have been an issue. And presumably these are claims that maybe could go back 5-10 years, or is there a statute
Even
of
longer.
limitations? Okay. So when one court finds a $60 million verdict for a plaintiff, what happens at that point? Does the manufacturer go like, we've got to settle with all the other cases, and we've got to do so quick because we can't have 400 people come in and win a $60 million verdict? We're going to go bankrupt. If there's thousands of people out there, this is untenable for us. What do? Do they negotiate, or do they start bankruptcy proceedings and try and start up as a different company?
Well, right now they're going to appeal and hopefully they're going to try to get the verdict overturned. Whether they get the verdict overturned or not, it's a significant sign that these are very dangerous cases for the companies. They haven't come to the table to start negotiating anything at this point, but these are publicly traded companies. They have a duty to their shareholders. I can't imagine that that's not something that they would be considering based on that, but it's just the first trial, and this is a mass tort you often have to try multiple cases before you get to a point where everybody's ready to sit down and talk about a resolution of the entirety of the cases.
And is this a situation too where, like, are we at that stage where, like, there's a defendant's trial case that they pick and a plaintiff's trial, and then you sort of match those up and come up with a number, or is that down the road?
We will do that in federal court, so that's down the road. In state court, it's more of a first filed gets tried.
I see.
This first case was tried against Mead Johnson Infamil product. There's going to be another case in state court tried this summer against Abbott for their Similac product. So we'll see some similarities, but it's not the same product. It's not the same company. It's not the same evidence. The same science, but not the same evidence of what did they know? What were they talking about? Like you were just saying internally.
Are they still providing this for premature babies?
Yes.
And are they providing this with premature babies? Are they issuing warnings or anything like that?
Not at all. There's nothing on the package. They've never sent a letter. There's a thing called a Dear Doctor letter that a lot of times drug companies will do. And companies like this, they have sent Dear Doctor letters before about other things. Say, you may recall there was a contamination issue with Similac a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to warn everybody about that. They've not done that at all with regard to NEC.
And they don't do that because if they did that, that would be an admission that they're aware of it or that it exists? Or is it just, they don't want to publicize it because maybe they're thinking, if we start telling doctors this, they're going to tell their patients. All these patients are going to know it. Maybe they're in communities of other premature babies, and then other people are going to know that maybe they are eligible to be within this sort of class of people. Is that what's?
Maybe. I think probably more likely we have two companies competing with each other. If one sends a letter out and says, we think our product is associated with this, and the other doesn't, then they give an advantage to the other company. That's my belief on why that's happened.
Can't they say that, like, as you know, all milk based products, including our rivals, could they say that, or would they?
I think they'd open themselves up to a litigation among themselves, and there are differences between the products, and so they could argue that. And I really think driving this issue more than anything. One, they don't want to admit their product is dangerous. Two, they don't want to do that and have a competitor who doesn't admit it at the same time.
So is there any mechanism in which you guys can, that you guys use to warn doctors now? So that word comes out. Could I start an organization like premature baby formula awareness.org or something? But they might come after me and sue me in that instance.
Potentially, they could do that. The only way we're able to get this information out other than through the litigation right now is like this, talking to you, hopefully your listeners here. I can tell you, I had a premature baby, and I asked lots of questions because I was concerned. I never heard of this even being a potential risk at all. Nobody told me that. We fed our baby formula because that's what they said to give to the baby to make sure that she grew. I had no idea.
Wow.
Parents do not know this is even a disease that exists unless their child has it or someone very close to them has a child who has it. So clearly there's not enough awareness out there. I don't know the best way to get it out there other than to just keep talking about it. And these cases should help to do that. That's what we do generally in this business.
Is there no journal of obstetricians or something like that where it's like, hey, heads up here?
There's studies that are already out there, but for every study that I will say is what we believe to be scientifically valid, there are industry funded studies that tend to find differently. And so what you'll hear from the companies is either the science is out on that, we're not sure, or what they've started to say in this litigation is that our product isn't dangerous. Breast milk is just really protective. Basically, like breast milk is a vaccine of some kind rather than their product being the problem. You follow?
Yeah,
it's an interesting argument.
That's an interesting argument. I guess you could say, like, that's like saying, I don't know. It's not that the Pinto blows up a lot. It's just that other cars don't blow up much.
Right.
And that seems a little weak. But how do they also argue that everybody knew this anyways?
It's a very tight rope that they walk. But what they say is, yes, this is known, but it's not, again, this is new. This is a new thing, because when we started the litigation, this was not what they were saying. It's not our product that's causing it. It's the lack of mom's milk protecting the kid, that something else is causing this to happen, that kid's just not getting the protection of from our formula.
But they sell it as a substitute.
Yes, they
and what they're suggesting is that you shouldn't just take this alone. You should actually take mom's milk and maybe a little bit of this.
That's kind of what they say. But if you look at how they advertise their products, they use terms like closest to breast milk, closest to mom's milk, and this is how they compete with each other. And they don't at all talk about the biggest issue, which is
this danger. 1 out of 10 kids are going to more or less reject it, or their body is going to very slowly reject it in a way that's going to cause permanent harm in many instances.
Right. And death.
Is there like some resource that people can go to get more information on this in the event that they know somebody with a premature baby, or they're pregnant and they just want to know this information beforehand?
There is a NEC Society. That is a nonprofit. People can go to their website. There's the
NEC.
NEC, necrotizing enterocolitis, again, which is tough to spell and to say. So it's not just us who says NEC. The medical community calls it NEC too. That's probably the place I would start. If you have a premature baby, I would say go look at that, but you don't even know to go look at it because nobody tells you this is an issue with a premature baby.
Right. Wow. Well, I guess we'll get an update of this maybe in 6 months and see where it's at. Andy Childers, I really appreciate your coming on and telling us about it. And we'll put a link, Bradley, to the NEC Society, and so that people can get a sense of this. But bottom line, there are other products out there that are based upon human milk.
Correct.
That are, safer.
Right. And just straight donor milk is safer.
Right.
And that is available in pretty much anywhere. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy.
Got it.
Thank you. All right. So I guess let's just go back in. We got a little bit of time left here. We had talked about, we were going to talk about that Florida Supreme Court abortion decision. But, that case is indicative of the type of cases that you hear here. And it's amazing. Every, I don't know, fourth or fifth attorney, particularly the older ones, I will take the opportunity to go, like, how do you deal with this? Like, how do you, have this sort of like ongoing awareness that these corporations will continue to profit off of stuff that they know, or they think, or they or they should know is killing people, maiming people, damaging them for their whole lives. I don't know, damaging them for a year. I mean, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It is.
That doesn't show up in your bank account, though.
It is. But I am very curious. I mean, Papantonio said this earlier in this program today. He's like, they're sociopaths. And
yeah.
I mean, it's, I wonder, if there is something about the corporate structure that essentially allows sociopaths to thrive. And, presumably not everybody in a corporation is a sociopath, right? there's something in the corporate structure that inhibits or allows for the ability of sociopaths to flourish within that corporate structure.
Well, the corporate structure is also so distinct from like the actual creation of the product, right? Like there's so many different barriers of like the ability to sanitize the reality of what they're putting out there. So like they're not even dealing with the day-to-day, I'd imagine, like realities of what their products are.
You mean they're siloed? Everybody is siloed in the thing, and so that's not my. It's easy
like
to
Boeing, right? It's not like engineers that are making these decisions.
Yeah,
it's business
right.
Businessmen.
People. Yeah.
Yes,
and, I mean you don't need to be a leftist to think about. I mean John Ronson's book. I think it's not them. The Psychopath Test. I mean makes a pretty straightforward case, but also like I've heard from my family members talking about like as they retire, being like, yeah, the people that rise to the top of these organizations are like bloodless psychopaths that like really do not care about you, have extremely weird antisocial behavior, but it works in a corporate setting.
Well, guys, just be ready for our annual summit that we're going to be doing at the Majority Report.
Where we learn how to mimic human emotions.
We have a new handbook. Exactly. Don't forget to bring your face diagrams. And we're going to. All right. Let's go to the Florida Supreme Court. Emma, tell us exactly what that Florida Supreme Court decision was, because it basically blows away. It allows for a 6-week abortion ban in Florida.
Yes. So essentially, Florida had been, despite Ron DeSantis being the governor, a bit of a safe haven recently for people to go and get abortions after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. You'll recall the story of Kate Cox, who I think was featured at the State of the Union by Biden, who traveled from Texas to Florida to get her abortion. And this is no longer going to be allowed in Florida. The right to an abortion had been enshrined in the state constitution as a privacy right. And now, in a 6-1 vote, the very conservative state Supreme Court has abolished that right to an abortion. There were decades of precedent that the state Supreme Court overturned. And this immediately really triggers a 15-week ban that had been passed. But there was a separate law that the Florida state legislature had passed fairly recently in response to the federal Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, that triggers a 6-week ban 30 days after such decision. So on May 1st, a 6-week ban in Florida for abortion with these, window dressing exceptions will take effect. And the state Supreme Court also, though, ruled, which is the silver lining on this front, that on a much narrower margin, 4-3, that there will be a question on the ballot in November, in the general election in 2024, where voters will have the ability to decide if abortion rights are enshrined in the state constitution, as well as cannabis legalization. Both will need 60% approval to pass, but this is, from an electoral perspective, something that really scares Republicans. Ron DeSantis was very against these measures being on the ballot in the fall. But the material reality for people who can get pregnant in the interim, and even if it doesn't reach that 60% threshold, it's quite dire. And here is the Florida House Minority Leader. Again, it's just the Florida Democratic Party. This is the first good news that they've gotten in, and it's barely anything they did in decades, but they're gutted. But this is the Democratic Minority Leader reacting to the decision.
I know folks are busy going about their daily lives, not necessarily paying attention to what the Florida Supreme Court is doing every day. But you should know that this is a day where they got it wrong. Yes, we're very glad that Amendment 4 is on the ballot. Vote yes on 4. But please understand that this case that is going to put this 6-week ban into effect is effectively like the Supreme Court drawing a line in the sand. The Florida Supreme Court has drawn a line in the sand, and they are basically putting it to the people. And they're saying, people of Florida, Floridians, pay attention. If you want access to abortion as healthcare, you yourselves are going to have to do it. You yourselves are going to have to vote this November to put this in the Florida Constitution to protect rights for everybody. And should we succeed in that, that language in the Florida Constitution should override the 6-week abortion ban and get rid of that horrible law that puts an abortion ban before many women even know that they're pregnant, before there are important tests that can be run on the health and the safety of the fetus. It's absolutely wrong. So it is a mixed day in Florida for sure. I know.
So there it is. And I think the Democratic Party in Florida is already sort of like warning the Biden administration, don't get your Biden mixed in with our abortion referendum campaign, because you're not gonna help us. Now, with that said, the Florida Democratic Party is, like you say, Emma, a disaster. They have been disastrous in a multitude of ways, even with their traditional, we're not going to have a contested primary, which they've done in the past. They ended up losing, I don't know, was it maybe a half a dozen, maybe a little less, mayor races in the last primary. I think their primary was like 2 weeks ago. And they ended up losing a bunch of mayoral seats because you're not giving Democrats a reason to go out. This isn't like in New York State. You go and it's basically like, unless there's a contested primary, and I don't even know if there is been a contested primary in New York State for Congress. But all it is, you're voting for the president. Well, in Florida, it happens that there were also local elections. And so there is value in doing that. I mean, and the Florida Democratic Party doesn't seem to be able to add or to divide or to do, sort of like basic sort of calculus about what's going to happen. They basically said it's not worth our expending the cash on this, I guess, to save these local seats. And of course, it just continues a feedback loop of losing. So it remains to be seen if there is going to be, I would imagine putting abortion rights and cannabis rights on the ballot is going to bring out a lot of people who, at the very least, you would think would have more of a propensity to vote for the Democrat than a Republican. There's no guarantees, and who knows? Florida's a weird state. But
this is the exact situation where, like, Democrats should be salivating in the sense of, you
could not ask for anything more than
a high-profile Republican despised governor who you're also going out to vote against, abortion on the ballot, cannabis on the ballot. This is a perfect opportunity for Democrats, but it's the Florida Democratic Party who, I don't know who's worse. The New York Democratic Party, that gets kind of papered over because it's a blue state, but they're completely negligent and oftentimes just like incentivized by the wrong things. But the Florida Democrats, they've been horrific.
I mean, I think we could have a debate on this, but I think Florida Democrats seem to be just incredibly incompetent. New York Democrats seem to be willfully incompetent at times, and it's really more about a racket, I think, for a lot of New York Democrats. But that's for another day. Florida Democrats have essentially the best case scenario for them to win something, and we'll see. Hopefully, hopefully there's an opportunity there, but we'll see. What should we get to next here? Let's see. Oh, you want to do this minimum wage one? This clip number 12?
Yeah, sure. So Newsmax's Rob Schmidt. Yeah, I guess it's not really that important. All of these backbenchers, it's just they kind of blend together, honestly.
Not to be confused with Newsmax's Rob Finnerty, who basically looks exactly the same as this guy.
Yeah. He is on here with former Reagan economic advisor Art Laffer, and you will recall the name Laffer as in the Laffer, the Fugazi Laffer curve situation.
This isn't a wax recreation of Laffer. This is actually him.
Yeah,
he's still alive.
He's still alive. I was shocked to see that. And they're talking about a $20 minimum wage. You can probably anticipate what their reaction is going to be to that, but let's hear them out.
This is just to be clear, California, just, I guess it was Monday, they had passed legislation and it went into effect on Monday that if you're a fast food restaurant with, I believe, you need to have stores all across the country to be considered, I think it's maybe 50 stores across the country to be considered a part of the cohort that needs to raise their minimum wage to $20 an hour. There is apparently some confusion with some outlets like, we just sell ice cream. Are we a fast food restaurant? We don't get the margin that others do. I'm sure that's going to be resolved, and I'm also sure it's going to be exploited as much as it possibly can to talk about, like, we're in complete disarray. We don't know what to do. Well, I'm sure you can find a finding, and you'll figure it out. But here are these two.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously, they keep telling us it's a strong economy. It's all built on inflation. I mean, this is an inflated economy that's giving them, numbers that they can use to say that it is strong. But when you have inflation like this, prices are up probably 30% since 2019. That is devastating to the American people, and largely at the hands of government spending, as we know. They've created a larger economic divide.
Pause it 1 second. I just want to point out something. When Rob Schmidt says prices are up 30%, okay, let's just leave that unlitigated. We have had inflation. The inflation rate is slowed, but some of the prices remain high. There's no doubt about that. But if you believe that people are suffering, what do you mean people are suffering? Are you saying that they're having trouble making ends meet? And who would have the most trouble making ends meet? That would be people who are making very little money. Say, people working at fast food restaurants. I mean, so...
And did he say up since 2019? Did I mishear that? Or was that what he said? Because that is like a pretty big swath of economic data to be drawing from when we know that inflation has curbed in recent months and in the past year, actually.
Right. But I mean, even if we stipulate that there's been a lot of stickiness with some of those prices, particularly rent and housing, but in some instances, food. I mean, it's certainly prices are up. Some have gone back down, but lumber's still high and stuff like that. But if you stipulate that he is being truthful there, he's describing exactly why you would need a $20 minimum wage.
Yeah, so they can pay in the communities they're serving.
Let's just start it over so we can hear the full kind of.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously, they keep telling us it's a strong economy. It's all built on inflation. I mean, this is an inflated economy that's giving them, numbers that they can use to say that it is strong. But when you have inflation like this, prices are up probably 30% since 2019. That is devastating to the American people, and largely at the hands of government spending, as we know. They've created a larger economic divide in this country just in the last few years. Unaffordability and the decimation of the middle class has taken a huge leap forward since just 2020.
Yeah, and let me say that, inflation is one way of looking at it, but that's an economist's way. Real people don't buy inflation. They buy goods and services at prices. And as you said, prices since Biden took office are way up. Now, the rate of increase of those prices has slowed down a little bit. That's true. But the prices are still very high, and there's no sense that they're going to stop rising in the near term at all. When you look at employment in the U.S., no, the unemployment, Rob, is very low. I mean, relative to historical standards. But that's not what people look at. They don't look at that. They look at what the employment rate is. And the employment rate is also really, really low, because all these people have left the labor force.
Yeah.
A huge percentage of them have left the labor force.
The participation
decimating
rate.
production, output, employment. So those are all the things that you look at. And interest rates, in the process, especially mortgage interest rates and stuff, are up a great deal since Biden took office.
California's $20 minimum wage set to start next month. No surprise, you're seeing businesses already cutting jobs. The story from the Wall Street Journal, Pizza Hut, Round Table Pizza laying off 1,300 delivery drivers. $20 an hour sounds really great, but until you realize that you're going to have to probably work twice as hard to get it, and your best friend at work had to get fired for you to get that wage.
Well, that would say something about your employer, that you say it sounds great. To me, it sounds really awful, because I pay people, get paid by people. Mm-hmm. And when you employ people, $20 an hour sounds like a very high number. It really does. Now, if you think of yourself as the recipient end of that $20 an hour, but if you're the McDonald's, if you're these other people, those are increased costs that you're going to have to pass on through your goods and services.
And let's just be honest, that there's so many people in this economy that when it comes down to it are probably not worth $20 an hour. And those people will lose their jobs in California.
I said that on MSCC the other day, and I got riled for it for having done that. But the truth of the matter is, in the economic sense, they're not worth it. They're very fine people. We need to do a lot more in this world for them, but they aren't worth it in the sense that they can get a job by someone voluntarily to pay them $20 an hour.
Okay, all right.
In that sense,
all right. I mean, I'm curious what Art Laffer is advocating here to do for those people. They're very fine people. They just should not be being paid $20 an hour. What then happens to these very fine people? They have to live in abject poverty while they serve you their food, or is his intention that he has this secret plan for a huge sort of like welfare state for them? It's absurd. I would also say, just going back, they were talking about the labor participation rate. It is low, but it's really not any lower than it was, let's say, in October of, in November of 2016. In fact, it's probably a little bit higher. It is lower than it was in January of 2020, and it's creeping up. But there's a reason why a lot of people left the labor force at that time. One is they took early retirement because they figured after COVID, if I'm 58 years old, am I really going to find another job? I'm 63 years old. Am I really going to find another job? How hard will that be? Will I get a decent job? Probably not. Knowing that, my intention is to retire in a couple of years. But the idea that somehow these people aren't deserving of the $20 an hour. We've got to take care of them in some way, but we'll just leave that aside and not talk about it. Yeah. Because remember, Art Laffer is the guy who came up with the Laffer curve, which basically says the more you tax, the less rich people are going to want to go out and make money. And supposedly that's a problem, because it's not going to create ingenuity, and it's not going to expand the economy, et cetera, et cetera. Except for the problem with that is that we had the greatest expansion of our economy ever was in those decades, in the 60s, in the 50s, when we had the highest marginal tax rate. And so Laffer's theory was put in the implications of Laffer's theory were put into effect in Kansas in the late mid 2000 teens with Sam Brownback was the governor there, and he brought in Art Laffer himself, and they got rid of all of these sort of like corporate taxes on these S corps, basically allowing wealthy people who incorporate to have a much lower tax rate. They lowered the top marginal tax rates because under their theory, they believe the less taxes, the more, ready for this? You cut you cut taxes, and they believe it's going to spur so much economic activity that you're actually going to have increased tax revenues. So I'm going to cut the tax rates. People are going to go out there and make more money. And that means there's going to be more money, even at a lower tax rate, that's going to come in terms of revenue. Because everybody knows that when somebody saves on their taxes, what they do is they go out and hire people, which you would never do. You only hire people based upon demand.
Yep.
And the only way you have demand is if you put that money into the pockets of people who will go out and spend it. When rich people get a tax break, they don't go out and spend that money. The famous line from that Nick Hauer, Hanauer, from those patriotic millionaires is like, a rich man buys one loaf of bread at a time because otherwise it goes stale. But if you're denying other people the ability to go buy a loaf of bread because they're just not worth $20 an hour at a fast food restaurant, or you're denying them the ability to go to that fast food restaurant and buy the food because they're not worth it. All you're doing with those tax cuts is putting it in the hands of the wealthy. And you know what they do? They do the incredibly productive thing of just making the stock market go up, which puts more money in their pocket.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like what this also is just really,
I was being facetious with
I know. But like in what they're just dancing around here is what they're most concerned about is wage inflation. And the fact that wages are potentially catching up to what inflation has driven up since like the federal minimum wage has not increased in decades, even as inflation has ticked up and up and up. And so some of these states are attempting to combat that. But also here, we know now that corporate price gouging in the shock of COVID was a massive driver of some of these inflationary, of a lot of this inflation, as well as supply chain issues and backlogs from the pandemic. And what this minimum wage increase does is elevates those wages to have some of these workers get a little bit of those spoils, as opposed to it going into stock buybacks or something like that. I mean, that's what they're mostly
the money that goes
concerned
to
about.
investors is never resented. You see this with the rideshare companies in Minneapolis, where Minneapolis, the city council, DSA members and progressive Democrats passed a rate, and the mayor said, this is what he said: DSA Land City Council majority has recklessly voted to require rideshare companies pay a rate that would make it unworkable for them to operate in Minneapolis. You look at that rate, and it was about the minimum wage. The change was because the amount of time that they're spent not picking anyone up, waiting for the apps to get a car. The rideshare companies don't want to count that because then it clearly looks like all these drivers are under the minimum wage. But anyway, like when they say unworkable, it means like we can't pay these people the minimum wage of the rest of the businesses around the company, and also give our investors the return that they're expecting.
Of course. And look, the bottom line is what's going to drive the prices of these fast food restaurants is the willingness and the ability of the people who go there to afford them and their demand. And the question as to whether we're going to dig into our profits or dig into or essentially raise our prices. That is going to be a corporate decision that's going to be made. But the fact is, their employees are ones who are going to be eating at those restaurants for the most part. And so the volume of business that they're going to get is going to go up because that's the way it works. If I own a bakery and I get a tax cut, I don't hire another baker because nobody's necessarily coming in to buy any more cookies or cakes. I only hire that person if there are more people who come in, and I sold out of cakes at 3 p.m. today,
And so I need another baker. And so that I don't sell out of cakes until 5 p.m. when I want to close shop. And the only way you do that is demand. It is not tax cuts. No one goes out. There's no one who goes out, and particularly in the food service industry, and say like, well, I've got this tax cut, or I've got cheaper. I'm going to innovate and come up with I'm going to spend more money on a new type of cake that I'm making. That's not what happens.
Right. That's why they went to a Reagan economist and not a normal economist who would say exactly what you say, which is that there's a velocity of money component here, and more money in people's pockets mean more money in the economy moving around.
Absolutely. A dollar you put in the hands of one of those fast food workers will travel somewhere be like 5 or 6 times more than one in a wealthy person's. For instance, if I get a tax break and I am a multimillionaire, I invest that money. I don't need that money. I use that money to build more money, and that money doesn't change hands. It goes into a ledger and it sits, in the stock market, and it keeps getting leveraged. It's all financialization. But I put a dollar in the hand of someone who works at a fast food restaurant. They go down to, the local Piggly Wiggly. They spend that dollar, and then that dollar, the guy gets paid from that, and that dollar he goes out and he buys a pizza with it, and the guy working at the pizza store goes and buys something for his car. I mean, the dollar travels in the economy. It doesn't stay sort of like hoarded away to accrue more money, and we can look at like what happened in Seattle. This is not like there's no data out there. We can look at what happened in Seattle. We were told the exact same thing. The entire restaurant business in Seattle is going to fall apart if you give wage increases. The fact is that everything that Emma said about the inflation during COVID is the case. There was logistics issues. There was some inflation, but there was primarily logistics issues. And then with the logistic issues that drove up the prices of things, other people look around and go like, we can drive up the price because everybody's now expecting it to be more expensive. And that's just the psychology behind this inflation. The idea that it was, too much government spending. And the irony of all of that is if you think there's too much government spending, that they have flooded the economy with too much money, there is a very easy way in which you can constrain that. And you don't even need necessarily to do it by having the Fed raise interest rates. You can tax that money away. You can take it away off the table, essentially. And Art Laffer surely understands that, I would imagine. But all right, let's go. Should we do one more and then wrap things up?
Okay.
Trump.
Let me check.
It's like he's having a Trump and Biden are trying to have like a race to the bottom when it comes to immigrants.
Sure. You want to do that Trump clip number 11?
Yeah.
Okay. So Trump's on the campaign circuit and he's back to his roots, for the
Playing
most
the
part,
hits.
Playing the hits. He's spending way too much time speaking about the fact that has 91 charges against him and hundreds of millions of dollars that he has to pay back because he defrauded people and all of the judgments against him. But I was listening to, NPR this morning, and they quoted some Republican strategist that says, just my advice to him would be to stay on message and talk about the things that are universal, aka stop talking about the damn 2020 election and then all of like the things that you are embroiled in. Because this is actually the stuff that Republican voters care about, which is that migrants are evil, Muslims are evil, women should be controlled, and
country's a hellhole.
Hence the hellhole. He came down on that escalator and he said Mexicans are rapists, and now, again, playing the hits.
Weak border policy. And just a few weeks ago, I met with the grieving family of Laken Riley. You know Laken, she's She was incredible. Top of her class. Everything was the top. She was the top of everything. She was incredible. I met the parents, incredible people. The 22-year-old nursing student in Georgia who was barbarically murdered by an illegal alien animal. The Democrats said, please don't call them animals. They're humans. I said, no, they're not humans. They're not humans. They're animals. Nancy Pelosi told me that. She said, please don't use the word animal, sir, when you're talking about these people. I said, I'll use the word animal because that's what they are. I'll never forget my vow to.
They're animals. This is the same woman, incidentally, that Marjorie Taylor Greene had given like a button to Joe Biden at that time, and it is amazing how much this one person who was killed by an undocumented immigrant has become this icon. You would never, ever, ever see them talk about the one of the dozens of children that are murdered in mass shooting events, or there's been hundreds upon hundreds of people who have been killed in mass shooting events. They would never single out a single one of them.
Bradley pointed this out, a great poll here, that this was when Biden at his State of the Union got lightly criticized by some in the Democratic Party for saying she was killed by an illegal. Remember that? This is who he was referencing.
She was killed by a Venezuelan. And just to remind people what has been happening in Venezuela, which is a giant collective punishment operation by our government to destroy their oil industry for politics.
And it's also interesting too that after that Biden said that at the State of the Union about Laken Riley, basically baited into having that say her name dialogue with Marjorie Taylor Greene. He then had this interview, I think on 60 Minutes, where he said he regretted using the term, or it was on MSNBC with Jonathan Capehart. He regretted using the word illegal, which then every right wing talker took the turn to then be like, see, he regretted saying it. He wasn't illegal. Like, good job, Biden. So now you went hard enough, and then now you're completely tucking tail and saying you regret saying that person wasn't illegal.
It's never
futile. It's completely
enough.
Futile. This bend towards far right immigration rhetoric from Biden.
It will never be enough for them. Biden could repeat a Trump speech word for word, and they would still say that he is soft on the border. So
he could put razor wire in himself, and they wouldn't be like, okay, well that is woke razor wire. We need some different razor wire. In
right. Did black people make this? This is what we've been trying to do as it relates to Israel with him. Clearly, appealing to his humanity about immigration or, the Palestinian people isn't working. From a political perspective, buddy, you're never gonna win this battle. So start your own one and play on your terms.
Is there any other clip we should get to?
I think we're all right.
All right, great. All right. Well, folks, I guess a freebie Wednesday. I will be back on Friday. Emma will be here tomorrow. I'm going to go try and make $1 million at the blackjack tables now.
You going to the Sphere?
No, I'm not going to the Sphere. I went last time. I went last in October, and it was terrifying. But I did see it lit up, and it is a big...
Makes you proud of
lit
America?
up orb. Oh my God, yes. I honestly, when I see that thing, I honestly, the first thing I think is they are hiding the multiple deaths that have happened there. It is so steep, and you can't even believe it. It is so steep.
We talked about this already. Did we talk about it off air? Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I just don't understand how are there any building inspectors here? Isn't there any standards about how steep something like that can be?
Not for James Dolan.
I'm reading a book called Havana Nocturne including a short section on how Las Vegas was formed and maybe the class of individual who formed Las Vegas, i.e. mobsters.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think they're probably still haven't got around to some of that stuff.
It's amazing. It really is amazing. All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.